education. And so there was, I think education had suddenly become a household subject to debate. Everybody was discussing online classes, and education had become this very favorite subject to, to debate about. And the NEP has just added to the conversation. So I've had students writing to me and saying, but ma'am, what will it mean about the language, and how will you how does it impact your school and things like that. So there's been a lot of curiosity and also anxiety about the language bit. Okay. I think in terms of overall coverage, the policy, the NEP is progressive, it's forward-looking, very, very comprehensive. It's got a wide ambit, right, from early childhood to higher ed, to teacher education, to vocational education, to professional education. Everything has been covered in those 54 pages. So I think very comprehensive, a very huge coverage. As a practitioner, and today let me talk as a practitioner. So as a practitioner, I think, the policy, I look at the policy as a platform, as, as a framework, and the framework is spelling flexibility. So there's a lot of flexibility that is being, that's being showcased in the entire document. So the draft, overarching feeling that I got from reading the document was that there is flexibility, and for me as a practitioner, there's ample opportunity to innovate, to look for solution-based innovations. So as a practitioner, I look at my job is to improve learning outcomes for students, and learning outcomes depend upon how we build capacity of teachers, and policy doesn't touch that, So as a practitioner, I would say that I look at policy only as a framework within which I have to work. Policy does not change things at the ground level. So as a practitioner, it doesn't affect me so much. Okay, I would look at the broad framework, and within the broad framework, look for my solutions to my problems at the ground level. It's only when policy goes wrong, when the macro reforms go wrong, that they come in the way of things that matter. So otherwise, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really affect the things that matter. So I feel that reforms are more effective when they're closer to the classroom, at the ground level. And so macro reforms really are not something that I'm overly worried about. So I'm not very worried or obsessed about the semantics. I'm happy that it is spelling flexibility. It's a huge coverage. It's giving me a broad framework, and I'm happy to operate within that. That said, I think, disruption is the order of the day today. And, we had the pandemic, and, people's minds change. And I think for the policy to come in at this point of time, there's lots more that we can do. So for me, I'm looking forward to the new equilibrium.
Absolutely. And what a wonderful word to use, that equilibrium, in terms of how a lot of what I love about this policy in some ways is also that it actually tries to bring in a lot of the stakeholders together. Much of what this policy is trying to achieve or sets out in terms of goals or goalposts requires that teachers, students, parents, school leaders, administrators, policymakers all work in tandem necessarily. I will sort of break this down when we talk about certain specific aspects. But Vishnu, over to you to talk about what your key takeaways are. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you, Pallavi. Just a quick sound check. Am I audible?
Yes, you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. And so before I share my comments on the NEP, Pallavi, I want to share two disclaimers. The first disclaimer is that my experience in education is limited to K-12, and especially the Indian urban private school setting. That's extremely important for us to keep in mind in what context are we interpreting any policy in this country, especially because our country is very unique because of its diversity, and we are very diverse even in terms of educational realities. So when you interpret what I am sharing, it should be viewed from an urban private school setting and not from a public school or a rural setting in it. The second disclaimer I want to share also is that Much of what we are talking right now is just it's a policy in that sense, and we must congratulate one, of course, for the policy to be policy to be introduced after 34 years. That itself is a huge accomplishment. But like Meeta shared a very interesting thing, and I didn't think about this earlier before I heard from her, that, if you had waited for so long, why didn't they wait for another 6 months post-COVID? Because there are new realities coming up in. But having said that, I think we have to acknowledge that this is a policy, and it is going to, within the policy, there will be some recommendations, and there will be very specific guidelines. And you have to distinguish between these two things. So I'm going to stick to what will make systemic changes and not recommendations, because some of the recommendations, like what Avnita said, there could be semantics, there could be intent. It could take many years for it to implement. So I'm not going to touch upon those things. I'm going to stick to specifically about systemic changes which could happen in the immediate context. So from those two disclaimers, I'm going to share three hits in some sense, three good points which I'm really excited about. And I will also share two misses or worries I have from this NEP. Yeah, I think the first systemic shift which has happened right now is the ECC itself, the universalization of the early childhood and care. Now, why is this important? Because traditionally we must recognize that as a country, we made a strategic blunder initially in our in early years as an independent country to focus inordinately on the higher education, where countries like us should have focused on primary education. I think as a nation, as a society, we were more obsessed with IITs and IIMs rather than ensuring that the early childhood is taken care of. It's a very controversial statement. I firmly believe even if IITs don't exist, our nation would have been far more effective if we had a primary school, a strong primary school setting. And if people don't understand the statement, then we really haven't appreciated the amount of diversity and inequity exists in our nation. So for the first time, I think at the policy level, we have acknowledged that ECC is a fundamental right for every child being born in this country. So that's one big shift. Of course, we need to figure out what is the form and shape in it. But acknowledgement is a big leap in itself. And my sense is RT will cover early childhood. There'll be standards and quality will come to every mom and shop preschool that exists in our nation right now. I think there'll be a lot more integration of the Anganwadi system into a Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan and RSVM for that matter. The second big hit for me, the second big positive in this NEP is, I think there is a broad theme of this policy to move towards measuring learning outcomes through tracking assessments. That's never happened. We've traditionally been, like most policies in our nation, we have only focused on input rather than output. Our accountability is limited to what inputs we provide, not with what output we create. And I think there's tremendous focus around ensuring there is tracking and ensuring there's accountability measured through student learning. Some of them could be the setting up the National Mission for Foundation Literacy and Numeracy, which is a huge shift after decades of work around figuring out that our children can't do basic reading and writing. Creating a national mission to ensure that happens, like the National Mission for Health. And I'm sure that there'll be a lot of progress on that front. Another huge win around the same theme is the National Assessment Center for School Education and setting up national level standards through the Parak movement. Third, again, is of course around an independent body to coordinate and calibrate the 70 state boards. Again, improving the quality of assessments, which is meaningful for admission to higher education institutes. That's again a huge systemic shift which is going to happen, which will have tremendous impact for K-12 schools. The third big shift is also around changing the nature of higher education structure as well as admissions itself, which for me, it's a big shift. And the fourth one, I said three, but I'm going to talk about the fourth one, which is also around, curriculum. There are several things that I talked about. Some of them just could be aspirational statements. I don't know how this is going to get implemented. Some of them are just old ideas rehashed. Much of this is what good private schools have been doing for a long time. And I think they've just retraded some of those. But one thing which I really like at the phase of curriculum reform is reduction in curriculum itself. Again, a very controversial statement. Not many parents may appreciate it, but any good educator would know that the biggest hurdle for school reform is the load of curriculum itself, that we have so much to cover in a short span of time. And this is not unique to India. Any nation, especially the US, for example, there is abundant research which has indicated that if you really want to cover the entire syllabus, you'll probably need 3x of the time than what we have. And that's one of the reasons we cram time, we rush through topics and chapters. But if there's a more intention to reduce the curriculum, then there gives a lot of space to well-meaning teachers to do some more deeper and meaningful work. Now, those are the 4 good things the NEP has done, and there's a significant wins for us as a nation. But there are 2 misses I also want to talk about quickly. One is, I think this policy did not talk sufficiently about the role of private schools in building this nation. One of the underrated jewels of our country, just like the way army and police is, etc., is the role of private schools itself. Think about it. Much of success of individuals on institutions have all been products of good private schools. The support of public schools is very minimal, but much of the CEOs, much of the great workforce India produces, they come from private schools. But 50% of our children today come from private schools, and it is increasing in a phenomenal pace. The number of enrollments in government schools is dropping now, which means that the government should ideally recognize the role of private schools with establishing accountability and regulations, of course. But I think there's not enough conversation on NEP in it. In fact, if at all there is mention of private schools, it is around regulation of fee. It is around supporting the not-for-profit nature and stopping commercialization. In my view, and if you look at the top 10 nations in this world, no country has developed without a healthy private school. The second big problem I have with the NEP, which is often a wonder I have, is that among the wonderful intent they have, I don't see how they will how they'll find money to fund these expenses. Right now, we are about 3% of the GDP. The ideally targeted 6%. To jump from 3% to 6% is not going to be easy. And I don't see a roadmap in the NEP to reach that expenditure target. With this, I'll end this, Pallavi, and I'll wait for more questions later.
Thank you so much for that very, very comprehensive overview, Vishnu. And I think it's also given us a lot of things to start talking about. I think you've made some very valid points around private schools and the role that private schools play in our education space, particularly the affordable private schools, which really bridge that very, very important gap of a lack of a robust public school system versus a very, very inaffordable private school system in a lot of spaces in the country. So what does this policy really mean on those fronts as well? And I think that you're very right in pointing out that it's a little silent on those fronts. So when we look at the policy, we know that this is just a document at the moment. It's a larger vision. It's what the government hopes to achieve over the next few decades. Like somebody very rightly pointed out in the chat today, the last 34 years will not necessarily translate into action within the next 6 months. And I think we need to be very cognizant of that as we move into any kind of implementations and expectations of implementations as well. So we have to be patient and also build this as we go along, because in the making of the policy, the passing of the policy, and the publishing of the policy, the whole world has changed. And I think that by the time we start implementing a lot of these changes, more things might change along the line. So we have to be agile in our thinking. And that brings me to 2 things that, in terms of the implementation of this policy, one aspect is going to be how states take on these policy recommendations and implement them, and break it down into actionable steps for schools, both in the public sector as well as, what those kinds of ramifications would mean for the private school as well. And the second is, what can schools themselves do? Because a large part of how this policy will play out, in addition to what the states say, is also dependent on how schools prime themselves for these kinds of changes. And I think all 3 of you in very many ways have pointed to that. How are we looking at technology integration? what do those macro level changes look like? What is it that we have been doing in terms of, some good private schools in the country over the last few years? What have we already been doing, which we should continue to do, and which might provide a roadmap for some other schools to take on from? So that's what I thought we could perhaps set out and talk about today. And I think the first thing that perhaps needs a little bit of demystification is that we're moving away from the 10 plus 2 and phasing in this 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4. What does that mean? And how is that going to change the way in which classroom instruction happens, or the way in which we assess students? Does this mean that we need to break down assessment cycles into smaller chunks at various intervals in a student's school life? Does it mean that what we're looking to do with centralized assessments, is some part of it also going to be sort of given over to schools in terms of factoring in internal assessments? How is that going to, what does that look like right now? And I thought maybe Ms. Bir, if you could start talking about what that looks like in schools currently and versus what it should look like.
Okay, so I think let's start with the structure. 5 plus 3, 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4. And I really like the 5 instead of the, the preschool and then the primary school and the middle school and then the senior school. So why I like it is because, when we would get students in grade 1 from preschool, there was a huge leap they had to take. There's a huge jump in the way they had to look at formal education, because, they were entering formal schooling for the first time, and the jump used to be huge. And I think that so now with this system of 5 plus 3, the class 1 and 2 being added to the foundation stage, okay, and early childhood becoming such an important aspect of school education, I see a more, a smoother transition from preschool to, to the preparatory stage. So from the foundation to the preparatory stage, I see a much smoother transition. And that's something which is good. In terms of assessments, what I really like is the fact that, we will not be teaching to the test so much now, because the high stakes have gone, and we're somewhere, the formative, the summative, the exams in grades 3, 5, and 8, this pattern is going to give us more flexibility in terms of being innovative in assessments. Okay, and so somewhere I feel like what Meeta said, the CCE is, the good part of CCE might come back. Okay, because my biggest grouse with this the 10 plus 2 and the board exam system was that in grade 10 it was not as if there was so much to be taught. It was not that the syllabus was so heavy. It was just that we were just going on teaching to the test again and over and over and over again. Okay, so we just kept the doors of the classroom were locked and the teachers were just teaching again and again. And so there was no scope left. There was no provision for any extracurriculars or any holistic development of the child. And that actually went away with the CCE, because, we were doing amazing kind of assessments, innovative assessments through the year, comprehensive, continuous. And I really saw good, good students, at the end of the year, wholesome students being, graduating and succeeding in the examination. And this whole system of, which school and the ranking of the schools based on their, their results, all of that had gone away. So as a principal of a school, I felt the pressure low, getting off my shoulders. So imagine if I was feeling lighter, how much lighter were the students and the parents and teachers feeling? So for me, that's a very big step forward, moving away from high stakes. And moving towards maybe a standardized test at the end of schooling, and looking at the exit from schools being much easier, and having a standardized exam for entrance to higher ed colleges. So that for me is something very encouraging.
Right. Thank you so much for that. I think one of the things that you mentioned about teachers teaching to the test, I think that's such a crucial part of how this policy documents comes together in various pieces. At no point in time in the past has the CBSE or any national board or any school, schools also introduce their own curriculum elements to classroom teaching. At no point in time were teachers told, don't do skill development, don't teach critical thinking or build enhanced critical thinking, don't bring in real world elements into your classroom. At no point in time was that done. And today there was a very interesting article by Pratha Mehta, who was talking about how perhaps one of the biggest betrayals to the school system have been, and I being a teacher myself, I find it, I find these words uncomfortable to say, but the biggest betrayal really has been by teachers, because we have consistently taught to the test. And the expectations that have been set out have also been that we teach to the test. So what kind of changes, and I see Vishnu's vehemently shaking his head to that. So I'm going to ask you to jump in and tell me what you think of that as a school leader, as a school that has also in very many ways, very, very consciously tried to move away from teaching to the test. What does that look like in your classrooms, and what can we learn from your experiences?
Pallavi, I should say I was nodding vigorously more to refute Pratha Mehta's views on several things, including this article which I read in the morning. But I'm just coming to your question. See, I think first thing first, we have to acknowledge, and this is something we have been telling the government also for quite some time, that within India, so India is a wide range. As much we have one of the largest broken systems in the world. And I hope people realize that we have the largest broken system in the world with respect to K-12 schooling. But we also have a phenomenally progressive, small, of course, it could be small number. There are probably progressive schools in this country. And some of these schools have broken the barriers and moved ahead in terms of what they could do within the confines of a national board or the requirements of the state education bodies. So that's one thing I want to place it on record, that within us we know there are several schools who do some exceptionally good practices in it. Of course, all schools will produce kids for the university, but like case in point, in heritage schools, for the first 7 years of our existence, we are about 15 years old now. First 7 years of existence, we stated to the parents openly in our admissions that if you want board results, don't come to our school. So we want to be the Sankhis, a group of mavericks only producing kids to be Krishnamurtis and Tagores. Okay. But then in the 7th or the 8th year, we realized that, we're not doing justice to kids' potential if we don't help them ready for universities. And I remember vividly in 2008, we made the shift and said, we will teach to the test in grade 11 and 12, but at least the first 11 years of their experience, we will do meaningful work. And back then there is no grade 10 board exams. We had the CCE. It provided abundant opportunities for us to do. I love CBSE, by the way. It's a misnomer to say that CBSE is a very restrictive board. It is not. In fact, it's a very hands-off board. I wish there can be far more hands-on. They're very hands-off board. They only have a few things to meet. Very easily you can manage those requirements. All you need is to test to help kids to pass the test, and it's the easiest thing to do in some sense if you focus on foundational skills all through. Now, coming to your point, why would teachers teach to that test? The answer lies in university entrances. So many schools, many parents intuitively know that we don't want to do this, but I don't think they see an exit point. When universities still harp on a 99-98% cutoff, there is a systemic issue of having a more broad-based assessment at the entry point. Now, one thing you have to remember, all curriculum and pedagogy is influenced by assessments, not the other way around. Often we say to reform schools, change curriculum and pedagogy. No. Reform assessment. If you change assessment, curriculum, pedagogy will automatically change in it. So my answer to you, Pallavi, is that I don't think we have to blame schools and teachers. Of course, there is a lot of accountabilities we should take in it, but an inordinate amount also lies in the testing system at the higher education. One last, I know I'm going on a long tangential, just one last statement I want people to think about systemically when you look at education. I think K-12 ecosystem, or now it's pre-K-12 ecosystem, I think bears a brunt of an inefficient higher education system in this country. The errors and issues of higher education system gets unfairly passed on to schools to manage. I think they should first reform in terms of having more authentic ways of selecting kids into admissions. Then school will automatically reform later. I don't know if I've answered your question or
No, you
tangentially.
have. And I think authentic assessments really are the buzzword, the keyword here when we're talking about how assessments need to be reformed. And when we're looking at the kind of kids that we want to send out into colleges, what kind of skill sets do they have? What sort of assessments will measure those skill sets is equally important. And I think a lot of schools have done lots of great work by, bringing in project-based learning or talking about inquiry-based learning, using AR, VR technologies. But one of the most important things that we also need to be cognizant of is that not everybody is on board those kinds of assessments. Yeah. So what is it that we need to do systemically within our schools? Meeta, I was wondering if you could, make that connect between the change in assessments in schools vis-a-vis the kind of requirements that higher education institutions have, and how we can do that kind of mapping of authentic assessments between the two spaces.
So thank you. Actually, Karthik, this is very interesting because I've engaged with a lot of, in a lot of discussions with higher education professionals, and they have turned around and said schools do not prepare students for higher education. And in fact, if you remember when the Delhi University 4-year degree was mooted, at that point of time, the first year was designated as a bridge year, saying schools do not prepare our students and therefore we need to grow them up to be independent workers, for example, to be able to do research, two specific skill sets that we ask for, Pallavi. We need students to be able to set their own goals, to be able to manage their own time, specific skills that all the best schools, the progressive schools, possibly in their echo chamber. I will also throw out a little bit of a challenge there, because they all do help each other. They all talk to each other. They all learn from each other. But the learning often does not go beyond the progressive schools. Yeah. And I think I think when you talk about the betrayal of teachers, some of the responsibility must fall on us because we have not stepped beyond the role that we were allocated. I will acknowledge that there was a lot to do in whatever every excellent teacher is doing takes a lot out of every teacher. Expecting more is too much. I accept that. But we really could have shared a little bit more of the wonderful things that we have learned to do in our classrooms. So I actually went into one engagement once with government school teachers in Delhi. And there were 30, 40 of us sitting together at lunch, sitting in the lawn with our little packets given out to us, like it happens sometimes. And I asked every one of them, who stops you? Again, the question you raised earlier, who stops you from bringing innovation into the classroom? This is a big picture question. I asked it in a more generic way. And they said, actually, nobody stops us. Again, you're absolutely right. The CBSE gives you permission. There may be certain specific school leaders. There may be certain specific school administrators, the DEO, BU, etc. systems, where teachers have been told, just stick to the syllabus. But nobody stops them from saying what they want to say in the classroom. In fact, half the trouble is they're not even being monitored or held accountable for the classroom. So it works both ways for the teacher. You have the freedom to do what you want to do. And now, luckily for them, good for them, the NEP also has told them, go ahead and do it. It's in the policy. Go ahead and do all the good things that you have wanted to do all along. Talk about entrepreneurship in the classroom. What is entrepreneurship? It is again the very same skills that we talked about in getting ready for higher education. Think of a student, and I'm reframing it for everybody. Think of a student as an entrepreneur who has a specific target. Now the target could be marks, and we limited it only to marks. But every student, every teacher and student knows that we grow up in different ways and we set targets. For a class 9 student, it may be, I will not shout each time I am angry. I will not have a meltdown. Class 9, class 10 are very, very intense years. To be able to engage in self-control is an important skill. The same thing, Avnita, you talked beautifully about year 1 and 2. Those are the years of socialization. I will learn to take turns. I will learn to share. I will learn to work in a team. Working in a team is actually an early year skill. which we have absolutely denied through our schooling because we have made it so obsessively competitive in the rote learning system. So I think the NEP is giving us two major, and I'm going to structure it now. It's giving us two major chances. One, to change our behavior in the classroom, to make it more about competencies and skills and less about the test. But more interestingly, and I want to take 2 minutes on this, bringing it back to the connect the dots in assessment in the policy. Now, this is the macro picture, the big picture. There are little things that they have dotted in the policy document here and there. And if you connect the dots, one, they have said the assessments are going to be about application. Assessments are going to be about critical thinking. That's one thing. Then very quietly in another place, they said, if you want to, you can, there will be a test provided by the National Testing Service, voluntary, where you can take the test, and that will, many universities will take that on for admission. Vishnu, to your point, they're changing the game there, you see. One of my complaints against this policy was it did not build this bridge between schools and colleges. You rightly pointed that out. But there are these neat little bridges placed over there. Now, what happens then in another place, they said, we are going to do testing of class 3, 5, and 8 with the SAS and the NAS, National Assessment Service, random sampling, not everyone, not every student. But what's going to happen here? The student marks are not going to be given out. Student marks are anonymized. You are not testing the student at all. There's no first, second, third happening here. It is the school that is being tested for its leadership, outcomes, and delivery, which is something that we have lacked for the longest time. Yeah. There are many other things in assessment that have not been done well. For example, as a school, we should be checking not the toppers, but we should be checking what's happening to the middle and to the laggards if we are testing the school system. But look, now with this 3, 5, and 8, you have cleverly put in a system where when you connect the dots, you can actually check for level of learning rather than obsessively forcing good students to do better, shutting the classroom door. There's 6 or 7 other points which I won't bring in right now, but the architecture of assessment across the various boards has neatly been put in place. And if that is implemented well, and there's almost no way of getting this wrong if you sequence and prioritize it right. The second last paragraph of the NEP is beautiful about this is how we do this, this is how we do this, this is how we prioritize this. So if anybody can read that. This architecture of assessment is transformative. And if we just follow along with the implementation plans, I think we as teachers will find ourselves happier teachers. That's the most important thing, I think.
You're absolutely right on that front. I see Ms. Bir was wanting to try and say something. Please go ahead. Are you on?
So a couple of things. What you spoke about. So, one of the things that I feel is historically teachers have been conditioned to teach in a certain manner. Okay. So, and I know that the biggest roadblock in innovation or any new thought was from teachers. And surprisingly, I've always also found it from students, because we've conditioned them to think that teaching learning transaction has to happen in a certain way, examinations have to happen in a certain way. So even they did not, while they might, grumble about the system, they do not want change because they don't want to be the guinea pigs. They've been just like, okay with, it's the passive learner. I'll be that in class. Outside the classroom, I learn in a different form, but in class, I learn in a certain way. So historically, they were conditioned to think that teaching learning has to happen like this, both teachers as well as students. But today, I think after the pandemic, and I think in that sense, you have to thank the pandemic for changing the minds of students, of teachers, of parents. And teachers, if you're talking about teachers teaching to the test, I see the change there now. I see them now becoming more creative because now they suddenly tasted blood. Like it's like I have seen that I can have much more impact. I can use a better pedagogy. I can use technology. So their whole worldview has changed with respect to their profession. And somewhere they've also started to take pride in the work that they're doing. And I think that's critical. So if teachers are taking, taking pride in the value of work that they're doing, I think that's a big step forward, because for the longest time, teaching has not been thought of as an aspirational profession, you know. So I see that happening, and with that happening, we're getting out of our comfort zone. There's definitely more openness to change and new ideas coming in.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the most important shifts that will also be, which will be more of a top-down shift, is that the policy clearly is now paving the road for colleges becoming more multidisciplinary. So we're moving away from a very straight jacket, I will become an engineer, therefore I will take physics, chemistry, and math, or I will become a doctor, therefore I will take biology, etc. Those kinds of mindsets are slowly, within this policy also, there's space to sort of dismantle those kinds of mindsets and say, let's become more generalists. And I think that corresponds with the kind of the way in which technology is changing, the way in which the world is changing. It's a reflection of what the next 20, 30, 40 years will really look like, and the kind of skill sets that students should build, as opposed to becoming specialists. We're moving towards a more generally accepted education in that sense. And that might also change the way in which we view assessments and how students are going to be assessed, and on what skills and on what knowledge base they're going to be assessed, which brings me to my next question, which is about what should be taught at schools. When we think about assessments, when we think about the kind of kids we want to send out into the world, when we think about this multidisciplinary approach in higher ed, and low stakes board exams with a greater focus on competency-based learning and skill-based learning and vocational learning. So if you were to say, and I put this to all three of you, if you were to say what exactly should be at the core, so the syllabus is being cut down to there'll be a core syllabus, core things to be taught, and then all these foundational skills around it. What would you include there?
This question is for whom?
For all three of you. So Vishnu, why don't you take it first?
Thank you so much. Every time you ask me to speak at the end, I have nothing to share after these two wonderful, experienced colleagues of mine. So, okay, so I'll share what our thinking has been. It's fairly, in some sense, it's like the philosophy of life itself. When you start your career, you start earning, when you build your own apartment, you kind of buy so much stuff. But as you grow old, a little more wiser, you realize you don't need so much stuff. And you start chopping it down. In fact, life post 40s is just about cutting your options and having the 4Q. And when you look at curriculum as such, I think that's so true. In education, less is more. Focusing. So I think David Perkins from the Harvard University talks about something called learning destinations. He says that, you have to be very clear what ideas you want children to have 20, 30 years from now. I think that's also a fundamental premise of many curriculum design frameworks. The UVD also, there's the idea, this big idea. So every subject or unit should have something called a big idea. What do you remember 20 years from now? That's a key design principle. And if you use that design principle, you realize you don't need much. In the way we look at heritage schools is, there are two key strands, which is literacy and numeracy. I think these two are very, very strong. They are foundational. In fact, the NEP also talks about setting a mission just for literacy and numeracy. These are so foundational that it will predict a lot of academic success later on in life. So that's two key strands. And I think every school should get these two right. When I say numeracy and literacy, I'm not talking about memorizing poems and getting the grammar right, or memorizing your multiplication tables, or finding some shortcut to manipulate. No, those are not. I'm talking about foundational skills, the way using numeracy and literacy as a language to understand and express the world. Okay, so that's two strands. Then comes your disciplines. It could be your social sciences, citizenship, entrepreneurship, some of those things, right? Physics, chemistry, math. Even in this, focus on the core. What is worth learning? I used to teach economics for many years, and now I've kind of given up because I just don't keep up with the pace of correcting homework. So I didn't want my kids to remind me that, Vishnu sir, you have not corrected. So I've kind of stopped teaching economics now. But I used to teach 9 and 10 economics, and I always felt, for social sciences in 9 and 10, I'm just giving this as an example. they have history, geography, economics, civics within one subject. And each one has about 6 chapters or 7 chapters. And then, of course, you have English, math, and sciences. You have physics, chemistry. Imagine, this is crazy. So even in social sciences, you have about 20, 25 chapters. So if I have to teach economics, out of these 5 chapters I have every year, I don't need to teach 3 chapters. 2 chapters are good enough. Classic example I give, there's a chapter called consumer rights. There's a chapter called globalization. Choice an educator has to take is what is important for a child in grade 9, consumer rights or globalization, right? Of course, there's a debate in this, but I would say it's globalization. Consumer rights, you can learn those 3 codes, the 6, 8 rules and the rights of it on a single page document. And I can spend 2 hours for you to understand this. Maybe I can do a project later on when consumer rights becomes important, but globalization is an underlying theme. It impacts culture, religion, society. The first earliest MNCs is the Catholic Church. Imagine if a child understands this, it opens up windows of understanding many phenomena in the world. So for me, choosing what to teach is extremely important. So on disciplines also, I will probably get 50%. And the third important thing is those other critical capacities and skills. We might call it 21st century skills or social emotional learning. In our school, we call it the human framework. What it is to make you a human in the 4th industrial revolution is what we want to focus on. What could those be? They are, first of all, starts with self-awareness, capacity to relate, design thinking, sense of citizenship, entrepreneurship. Of course, many schools have very different ways to articulate this, but for me, these are the 5 way we express our understanding of the curriculum. So literacy and numeracy, core standards on disciplines, and then your 4th industrial revolution capacities, which you build.
You know, Pallavi, it should have been the 4 of us who were writing this policy.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. But I did send in some recommendations. I'm hoping they make their way somewhere. That said, Vishnu, I think you make a very important point about, that choice. But a lot of the times, and much like what the policy also says, those choices are determined by the context within which the teaching and learning is happening, right? Ultimately, that is what also informs a standardized assessment at the end of this entire process. And I know I keep coming back to assessments, but it's because, like you rightly said, the assessment really is what needs changing. And when, for example, schools get this choice of saying, I'm going to teach something, like you said, globalization versus consumer rights or whatever, schools will make these choices based on their own contexts. And then there will be certain skill sets that the standardized assessments or your college level entry exams will be assessing so that this whole process becomes seamless. Are we going to fall back into that same trap is what I'm worried about. Because if at the end of the day, the school is making the choice, but we still require a standardized assessment at the end of this tunnel, what can we do to make sure that this is not just another test replacing the board exams?
Can I start off? Because I know the other 2 will have a lot more to say on this. I'll just start it off. I think a lot of it depends upon the nature of the question. You can have a standardized test. What does standardized test mean? A test to a certain set of standards, right? That it meets certain standards. Now, the standards that it meets could also include and test for competencies. Can the student formulate a new idea in this? And that's part of the IB stuff anyway. Therefore, it's not new. It's not something that teachers have to invent anymore. It's not scary. It's not scary stuff. It's the nature of the question now that matters so much. And I think a lot of the work that we need to do as educators and teachers right now is actually learning the art of the question. All of us as teachers know that when we want to shut up the entire class, we will phrase the question in one way. When we want the class, when we say, oh, we have 15 minutes extra, we will phrase the question, and so we want lots of discussion, we will phrase the same question in a different way. We are very smart about asking questions in order to generate the kind of responses we wanted. It's just that we haven't studied and worked on it in a systematic manner in our role as teachers and our role as assessors. There is a lot of literature, a lot of work done on it, and I think practically for us, while the gurus in the NEP, while the Sarkar people, while the state government people are creating their policy, practically for us in the next 6 months, we should be working personally on the art of asking questions.
Right.
And I think that starts us off in the business of assessment and smart assessment and handling testing and getting smarter children.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. That's such an important point. The whole role of questioning within the classroom and the kind of inquiry that then generates in students, and in very many ways replaces really the need for there to be a curriculum in the first place, if we do that part.
All the way to what Vishnu was saying. You start off with one tiny little point. I have to share one story. So one of the things that I do is I evangelize case study teaching methodology in MBA classes, and I teach faculty of MBA schools the case study methodology. So I and one IIM Calcutta professor, Professor Vidyanand Jha, we had sessions back to back. He simply stood in front of the board and he made one tiny dot on the board. And with that started off a 2-hour session, all question-based. We have these pedagogies, we have these experts, we have everything in place. Invite us and we will share. Again, this is also about sharing what we have learned.
I'm just going to stop here for a quick second and look at the couple of questions that have come in. There is an overwhelmingly large number of questions around the language point. And I know, Vishnu, you were very keen on discussing this. So I'm going to ask you to address this one straight up. There are concerns around what happens if the mother tongue becomes the medium of instruction. Challenges, opportunities, how are we meant to be looking at this? I'm wondering why.
In this setup, the host has to unmute each time first. It's a double lock.
Sorry, thank you. Should I answer that or?
Yes, please, go right ahead.
Okay, I think Meeta has a bigger view, and so would Avnita Bir, but I'll share. One of my backgrounds is I'm a student of cognitive neuroscience, and that's why I'm very interested in early childhood and even in languages. In fact, I had authored a couple of papers on bilingualism in private schools, in Indian private schools, because India is very unique. We have a lot of languages. We are rich in, dialects, for example, where most of the world is monolinguals, right? So first thing first, we have to recognize that two truths I want all educators and parents and policymakers to remember. This is a hard fact of science. So our brains, first thing first, can learn as many languages as possible. There is no, but provided it is learned by age 6, if not by age 6, at least by puberty. Anything post that, the brain shuts down what we call as critical periods. It shuts down the window of learning. Of course, you can learn languages post that, but it is a very difficult way. And even if you learn, you don't master accent and grammar. That's why South Indians like me will always have a regional tongue influence. People can guess I'm from the South, from the language I'm speaking, largely because I started speaking English primarily probably around my middle school or high school, right? Now, so that's one. Second reality is that if you learn multiple languages, it is a tremendous benefit through the human life. Children who have exposure to multiple languages have better creativity, better capacity for strategic thinking. By the way, strategic thinking can't be taught. That's one of the skills it can't be taught, but it is but it is learned if you have multiple. Third, your capacity to empathize and having the capacity to guess other people's emotions is very high if you have multiple languages. And more importantly, your probability of getting dementia and Alzheimer's, any neurological diseases due to old age, is almost zero if you have more than 2 languages. So I often say, just like the GPS coordinates 3 satellites, every human being should have 3 languages in the brain to keep the brain active and fresh all through their lives. Now, given these realities, there's also a third reality which people should recognize, that language is different from literacy. So when you often talk about the language policy, people confuse between language and literacy. Language is spoken. Okay, that is more important than literacy for 2 reasons. One, language is natural. Literacy is not natural to our brains. So I can learn multiple languages. I can't learn multiple literacy forms. It requires a lot of cognitive load. In fact, I know several kids struggle in math and science because they're stuck with Hindi. Because Hindi has to also be done well, and it takes inordinate effort. So language is not the same as literacy. So my view as a student of cognitive neuroscience in the field of education is that let young children be exposed to multiple languages early on in their lives. 3 languages, great. Not literacy, language, which means any obsession with any language, be it English or mother tongue, is actually wrong. So there are schools which say only English and no mother tongue or vernacular language. That is equally bad as against a state saying for political reasons or historical reasons only mother tongue. Both extremes are bad. I think as pragmatic parents, if you want to depend on what science tells us, encourage multiple languages early on. Having said that, remember, much of India is also on paths where they don't have access to English.
Yes.
Even the best of English teachers will actually do a great disservice to children teaching, let's say, other things. So in places where, I think, Meeta, I don't know, I've read somewhere you mentioning about this. If people don't have access to resources, let's say English, I think it's best they stick to a language that they're comfortable with. And lastly, let's remember, NEP just made a recommendation. It is not a law or a rule. It is a recommendation, which is okay for a policy document to make recommendations.
Avnita, what would you like to add to the language in medium of instruction part? Unmuted.
Okay, so I think Vishnu has very well explained it really well. And it's like he said, it's not the law, it's just a recommendation. I'm going to give you some examples of what we've experienced. So, we were living in that whole elite mode of thinking that, it's an English medium school and children should speak in English, okay? And I had this experience where children turned around and said, but why can we not speak in Hindi? So children are questioning, why are you making English compulsory to be taught to be spoken in school? That's one. The other is that we've got a number of schools in tier 2, tier 3 cities. And some of them are first generation learners in grade 5. Okay. And so, the principal and the school team had this problem of how do we teach social science and maths in English to these kids, because they had no background of English at all. So they were learning English for the first time. So we recommended that you teach language, social science and math in their mother tongue, and do English side by side. And by the time they reach grade 6, 7, 8, and 10, they're ready to take on English as the medium of instruction. So I think this is again a mental barrier that we have about languages. There is nothing to worry about.
Thank you for that. And I think also very importantly, what Vishnu said in terms of this being a policy recommendation, another thing that the policy very clearly says is that there needs to be a focus on bilingual. So for a lot of students who, for example, come in, who've been, in Maharashtra, their first 4 or 5 years of school and are now moving to, say, West Bengal, and the medium of instruction or the local language that is Bengali, the policy clearly says that we must make accommodations for wherever it's possible to have bilingual medium of instruction. And bilingual is a reality in this country today. We can't dispute that. It's not as if every school in this country is teaching children in English or teaching children purely in mother tongues. Bilingual is the order of the day. So the policy is perhaps what it's pointing to is that transition from your mother tongue to English needs to be facilitated better. Those resources need to be made available to make English learning more accessible to people. Imagine getting a kid who's never spoken a word of English their whole lives to sit inside an English speaking classroom. It'll be terrible. Where is that transition going to happen? That transition, I think, is what this policy is pointing us to, and which is perhaps what we need to look after, even at schools as well as within wider circles of education. When we look at teacher training and making resources available for teachers in vernacular, so vernacular content, vernacular support systems, all of that needs to be put into place. I think it'll be incredibly parochial to think about this from the lens of saying we're cutting off access to English by introducing the vernacular. I think it's the other way around. I think we're enabling access to English by introducing the vernacular. That brings me
happening in schools. I think it's happening. This personalization is happening in schools. So
correct, absolutely. I'm going to pause very quickly to take a couple of last questions. I think we've we've come to the end of our time today, even though this conversation can perhaps go on for another hour, considering how much all of you have to say about this. Very quickly, one last question around teacher upskilling, because much of what this policy talks about cannot be implemented in classrooms unless teachers are brought up to speed with a lot of these pedagogies, with a lot of this technology, Meeta, that you talked about earlier as well. What should school leaders look to do immediately in the next, say, year, 2 years, 3 years? What should that roadmap look like for teacher upskilling? Avnita, if we could start with you on this one.
Okay, so I'm going to start by saying that the culture of the school matters. Okay, so we have to create a safe, non-threatening environment for teachers to experiment, to take risks, to fail, to learn. That's how they're going to learn technology, how to integrate it well in their classrooms, and base their pedagogy on the technology tools. So we have to make them fearless. That fear has to go out of them, because that's what has stopped them from really coming out of their comfort. I mean, it was a comfort zone, but it was also holding them back. So those shackles have to be broken, and a culture of innovation and risk-taking has to be built, and that will have to come top down, and then allow teachers to share and encourage them to share. And I feel that even in terms of teacher training or professional development, teachers teaching each other and sharing with each other is much better than a top-down professional development program.
Absolutely. Meeta, your take on professional development programs and what those should look like in schools?
Firstly, I think let's recognize that schools are not places where you pour learning down a student's throat. Schools are learning hubs. And for the longest time, I think we have just done a lip service to the learning aspect of teachers and their progress. So I think it is a wonderful opportunity for us to help teachers progress. And I'm going to add one other layer of complexity to this, to what Avnita said. One, it's a great opportunity for teachers to learn more. Secondly, it is a great opportunity for teachers to learn in ways that they want to. So teacher pathways are a very interesting conversation that we should be starting right now. Some teachers are excellent administrators. Let them progress to specific leadership roles. Some teachers are excellent mentors. Let them progress to more mentorship roles. I think we have a case now for specialized teaching and teacher improvement programs.
That is such an important point, the one about teacher pathways and actually pushing teachers, which, I mean, if it happens in corporate structures, if it happens at companies, why can it not happen in schools? Play to the strengths of the person. And I think that's so important when it comes to, even building that kind of culture within your school. And what Meeta was talking about, in terms of collaboration, teachers learning from each other, and how we can actually create within schools learning hubs that can in fact be shared with everybody. And I think with Diksha and with some of the government portals, that is precisely the intention. Vishnu, closing thoughts on teacher upskilling, and we will then sort of try and bring this whole discussion together.
Thank you. Avnita just shared my point. I often believe that, upskilling and professional development is, in any upskilling and professional development, there are two parts. One is a technical part, one is an adaptive part. I think technical part you want to do through workshops and several other mediums. It's the adaptive which is difficult, and for that you need to have the right culture of learning. But another insight we have had is that I think because of COVID, people have now realized that investments in any physical hard infrastructure is quite meaningless in some sense. Not that buildings will go away, but the amount of effort I think schools would look at physical infrastructure is going to go away. I think even the government realizes that now. I don't think they're going to spend time in beautifying school campuses like some of the state governments have done. I think there'll be a lot of time and effort and resources going into training in it. And I think COVID has also realized that, look at this, on a Saturday afternoon, we have about 500 odd plus people, plus I'm sure there'll be a few more on the Facebook Live, educators connecting and exchanging ideas. I don't know, people have been in this field for many years. I've never seen educators logging in on a weekend for so long. And this is not one-off case. In many webinars, for example, I see about 2,000, 3,000 teachers coming in on a Sunday afternoon, learning. I'm amazed. So at Heritage Schools, we did a certificate program in virtual teaching. It's an internal small experiment. We just did it. We thought 500 people register. We had 6,500 people registering, paying money and attending the certificate program. I'm amazed in it. So I think there's a lot of shift towards learning through the web, and technology has provided abundant opportunities now. So I'm pretty excited about what all we could learn through this medium. If this is low cost, high impact, short bites in it, I think technology is going to make it more interesting and effective.
Absolutely, you're so right, and I think we're only just beginning to unravel the potential that technology truly has and how disruptive it can actually be. And I think particularly for teachers, because a lot of teachers were not online earlier, like you rightly said, and they're now beginning to come online. And I think there's a lot of other very, very interesting stuff that will soon emerge from this space, particularly with regards to teacher leadership and communities of teachers being created online, which have really started taking shape, and we're seeing them unfold.
Pallavi, one thing I want to add, I'm sure Avnita and Meeta are going to laugh at this. We keep meeting in conferences, but I think conferences are dead as a format of PD. That has been our mainstay for the last 10 years. But I think that is dead. And if you look back, that's an ineffective way of learning. I'm sure all of us have connected more with fellow educators in the last 3 months than what we have in the last 3 years.
From all over the world, really, conferences otherwise tend to limit you to the immediate geographies. We've reached out, on higher platforms, we have educators from almost 25, 30 countries, and they've all sort of converged together.
Time is expanded because in conferences, post-lunch, there would be nobody in the room.
Correct. Very true. Very true. So on that wonderful, positive and forward-thinking note, I'm going to thank all three of you for coming here today on such short notice at that, for bringing in such amazing insights to what promises to be a very, very revolutionary step. With, of course, a pinch of salt, I'm saying that. But if implemented well, this policy could really, truly be a complete shift in the way in which teaching and learning happens in classrooms. And I can't say that I've been more excited about anything else in the last decade that I've been in the education space. And I can't wait to sort of see this unravel and hope to see lots of interesting discussions emerge around this, and hope to continue to engage with all of you, including our wonderful participants. So thank you all of you for having been here today. Thank you participants for the great questions and the great conversation. And here's wishing all of you a wonderful weekend ahead. Do keep writing in and telling us what you thought about the NEP, because people are still making their way through the document, still unpacking it, analyzing it. And I know lots of interesting things, threads are still to emerge in terms of discussion. So please keep posting that on the group. We'll keep doing that as well as we come across other interesting aspects of the policy document. And we hope to stay connected. So thank you very much once again, all of you, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.